Welcome back, everybody. And this is a Caribbean Business Review. I'm Joseph Cox. And today we are speaking with Angela Rainford. And Angela is the founder of Soleco Energy, as well as, I'm sorry, Angela, I cannot pronounce the other one, so I was going to call it Rainmaker. Well, the thing is that as we continue, because you are somebody, you have what they call a really varied background. You in business, then you delve into renewable energy investing. You have had a background with McKinsey. You have had a really, really varied background. And I mean, from aside from the obvious question of when do you sleep?
I actually do sleep quite well, but yes, it's a fair point.
No, but the question is this. Let me be serious now, because
Mm.
you founded, you started what was probably the largest single solar plant, as far as my reading would have told me,
Correct.
in Jamaica. And I am very curious about one, why would you have gone down that route, given your background, which is in business, frankly? Why
Right.
would you have gone down that route? And secondly, how do you assess the investment climate within the Caribbean vis-a-vis, for example, you're in London? How do you assess it? What makes this part of the world an attractive investment option from your perspective?
I think from my perspective, besides clearly being from the Caribbean, I think it's an overlooked opportunity. And normally the places which are overlooked, I find, tend to have better opportunities, right? Less competition, more niche market. So the Caribbean, when you mention the Caribbean to a number of investors, classic investors, it's not top of their list. There's a traditional markets, the US, Europe. They may start venturing out into what they classify as emerging markets. And obviously there's Asia as well, which is a massive market. But the Caribbean is a little bit the forgotten place when it comes to mainstream investing. And I think it's a shame, but for people who are willing to look in the forgotten places, I think that's where you can find some of the most interesting opportunities.
No, I hear you on that. But then what strikes me then is that if people are not really looking at the Caribbean as necessarily the top of the line investment option, that would suggest to me that funding rounds will be a little more challenging. Premium, there'll be a interest premium attached to it, etc., etc. How do you navigate that but still maintain that type of viability in terms of a new venture, much less something of that nature?
I think it's important to do your work to begin with. So step one, do the research, right? Do the diligence, be able to present. And number two, once you've done the work, package it. So one of the critical parts with any entrepreneur, ultimately you're a storyteller. I can't remember where I first heard that from, but there's another entrepreneur describing it as you need to be a storyteller. And some of the best entrepreneurs are the best storytellers. So you pitch it with why is there an opportunity? Why should they invest? What's the benefit for them? Whether they are international investors or also local investors, right? We do have pockets of capital in our own markets which are looking for an interesting home. So I would say that yes, there are fewer pockets of capital. There's not as much of a volume for it, but the money is there. And the other thing is not just thinking about the geography, but if you start looking down basically the key industry, right? So my industry is energy, it's renewables. There's a lot of money for renewables. And over the last 10 years that I've been in the space, that money has only multiplied several fold. So rather than going into the meeting and saying, look, I want to pitch to you the specific Caribbean opportunity. No, this is an energy opportunity and something that you may not have looked at before.
No, I hear you on that, but one would have to recognize that the environment has changed, or well, it is changing. I'm not sure how far it has changed so far. We hear a lot of rhetoric, but we're not sure how far it has gone. And my query is this: has that dynamic changed? Because, for example, the United States, the current president has decided contrary view in treating with renewable energy and renewable energy solutions. So has that really, from your perspective, has that fundamentally changed the dynamic in the market?
From my perspective, no, because I think, especially for the Caribbean, it's not a subsidized investment. The nature of the economics just makes sense. I mean, solar makes sense for companies. But yes, in general, the overall global market, I mean, you'll find that a number of the oil and gas companies were increasingly going into renewables, veering away from their traditional mainstay. And even companies with their rhetoric, as you call it, in terms of, are we going more green? Are we focused on the environment? But I mean, not to comment on the US politics, but the reality is that even back in the first Trump administration, they had a significant growth in renewables. So there's what's being said versus what's being done.
Done.
And I think ultimately the industry is a lot more advanced and developed than it used to be. And if anything, not necessarily steering away from it, perhaps they're trying to find ways to invest, right? Which is not in a traditional way. So when it comes to, for instance, one of the main changes that we would have benefited from is the fact that the Chinese market, the Chinese suppliers are looking increasingly for another home. They've been doing that for decades. This is not a step change just because of the change of the US administration. In terms of our discussions with them, they are trading a lot with the global south. And the solar industry specifically is a very much China-centric industry. I mean, they're the largest module manufacturers, largest inverter manufacturers, and it is the largest market for solar. So rather than viewing it as an issue, to be quite frank, it's been an opportunity for us because now the suppliers are saying, look, we are still happy to supply to our traditional markets, but all these other global south markets are very interesting.
Mhm. No, I get you on that completely. But I mean, I noticed you said, for example, in the Caribbean, it would be an obvious choice. But one of the things that I have always queried is one, yes, you have solar solutions, but the distribution network, the tying to the main grid, and all the attendant challenges that come with that. Are we really ready for that type of throughput that would truly be transformative for the region?
So I think a couple of things. So you're absolutely right. Regulation is normally number one, but beyond regulation, there's the state of the infrastructure for distribution. And what's happened, whether the utilities have intended it or not, some utilities are not pro solar, right? Let's be very frank. I mean, you're in front of the Caribbean, so that's a statement of fact. And for a variety of reasons, I won't judge them on that decision because everyone to some extent takes care of their self-interest. So it would be very hypocritical for me to be negative on someone who's just looking after their own self-interest. I think that's fair. But what's happened is because solar has come down so much in cost, rather than trying to find a centralized solution, solar has become an effective decentralized solution. So what you're finding is it's less a concern about what I'm doing to the grid or how I'm going to connect to the grid versus I'm just going to self-generate. And that is a trend that we're increasingly seeing across the region. So I remember, and it doesn't mean that utility is not playing in that space, but I do think that's a little bit different dynamic. So in Barbados, for instance, they've had an excess, let's be very frank, an excess of decentralized system coming onto their network. And
Right.
part of the challenges there is not necessarily the self-generation being done by the respective industries or residences. It's more how the regulation is set up in terms of payment. So they have this ability, there's a feed-in tariff where they can feed into the grid at a price which quite frankly is very, very high. So what you have now is this excess of supply. The grid, the utility operator needs to be paying for this additional supply, and the grid is not geared up to be able to accept it or to distribute it effectively, and that is an issue on which they are now trying to resolve with this energy storage tender they've launched. But I guess just to go back to your earlier your question in terms of the infrastructure being perhaps a challenge, yes, it is. I think that is a statement of fact. But there are ways in which we're seeing across different jurisdictions that they're looking to relieve that bottleneck and that pain point.
Well, okay, I hear you. The other question would be for some, I mean, perhaps not Jamaica, but for some of the other countries within the region. Sometimes I'm hard pressed to identify the kind of solutions that would be really relevant for them, given the issue of size, just sheer size alone, and population numbers, etc. Well, how do you navigate that? I mean, what are the kinds of, because I mean, yes, I would agree with you. A lot of the areas are ripe for investment. No question about that.
Right.
Right? But then you still have those frankly, reality checks.
I mean, to be very frank, again, we struggle also with scale, right? We have a certain mandate in terms of the level of investment we need to push through, and also the resources. And to some extent, there's a fixed cost for us, whether it's a large project or a small project. This more or less the same amount of work needs to be done within our model. So we've been changing our business model, trying to adapt to find ways to tackle some of these smaller projects because they do exist and they are interesting. But again, as it comes to at the market level, it is a challenge. And I wish I could say, Joseph, I have this miracle response for how you deal with it. I mean, one of the things we've tried to do on the debt side is we did a capital raise on a portfolio basis. So we're looking at it, we're aggregating the smaller projects. And so rather than saying, look, we have this one little small project we want capital for, we said, no, this is going to be part of an overall portfolio. You need to be a bit patient with how they come through the system and how we aggregate them, but we're putting it in bulk. So it's effectively,
You
kind
spread the
of,
risk.
yes,
You spread the risk.
you spread the risk. So that is one strategy. I'm certain there are many others, but that's one way that we are trying to tackle that.
But then, all right, comment, if you will, on the regulatory frame within which you have to operate.
Depends on the country. As we look at a range of them, each country is different. So we look at Jamaica, Cayman, Bahamas, Barbados. Every single one has its own nuances. Some are more restrictive than others. The utility in some countries are owned by the government or part owned by the government, majority control. That also has its own special challenges. So regulation, it can completely kill what we want to do with a stroke of a pen if it is not set in a certain way. Regulation, with that said, I do find that politically a number of countries are open to it. They're voicing that they want to add renewables. They view it as a way, especially now with the pricing of where solar is, a way to help to bring down costs for their end consumer, which quite frankly should be the end goal, right? Is to make the countries more competitive, both from on an overall economic basis, and you do need to bring down the cost of energy because it flows into everything.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And but what hasn't helped, and this is a part of it that I'm particularly curious about. You have all these, I call them routine. By now, I call it routine. I'm no longer, I'm past the stage of being shocked or anything. Routine geopolitical issues that come to bear on this energy markets. The prices are volatile, they're up, down, they're all over the place. But at the same time, as you're looking at that, you're looking at a scenario whereby rates, oil prices are going up sometimes, like now we're going up somewhat.
Yeah.
What is the sweet spot where the prices are, how should I put it, low enough in the carbon market for it to remain, for the solar or the renewable energy solutions to remain viable options versus a converse? Because with the market being all over the place, I'm curious as to what is it? You have a crystal ball you're looking at.
Honestly, that's a very hard question. I've never been, I believe in renewables. I'm obviously a solar developer, but I've never been an advocate of a single solution for any of our islands. I think you have to diversify and have a mix of what you're doing for your energy supplies. So having a mix of some degree of fossil fuel exposure, some degree of renewable exposure, I think it makes sense to have a combination that works for you. And so that inherently gives you a bit of that hedge and balance as the prices change. For me, I like certainty. As business people, we want to know what's happening and have some view of where things can be. Renewables, especially, is capital intensive, but it's a capital investment. Once you've made the investment and you maintain the system, you more or less know what your costs are going to be over time, which is an advantage in my view of like solar installation. However, with fossil fuels, that's completely macro. Zero control, unless you're a member of OPEC and you're Saudi Arabia in particular, not even a member. You have to be the biggest member in terms of toggling the prices. And the US, if you want to be dealing with gas, the reality, you're going to be subject to volatility. And I think that's why I think it's important to have balance.
No, you have to have balance, but at the same time, and then I suppose we come full circle because then again, you're looking at diversification of sources, and let me put it that way, the solutions. But at the same time, you have the issue the distributive challenges, because the amount, our, frankly, right across this region, the distribution network is so outdated, let me put it that way, that the line losses and other challenges that obtain are immense. So even if your base cost comes down to something sensible, I suppose, within the marketplace, the truth of it is that given those losses, etc., those things have an additive.
And that is why decentralization is increasingly picking up, because you're not subject to those losses. So that's, I mean, taking Jamaica, for example, Jamaica suffers from significant technical and non-technical losses. So, which is a statement of fact. I mean, non-technical being, well, if you want to call it, you can call it either theft on one side or social justice on the other side. At least it made you laugh, Joseph. It's true, right? You can either view it as, look, they're stealing, or look, other people are stealing in other ways. Should be something that's a public good. But someone has to pay for it, right? It has to come from somewhere. And that drives up the cost. That does drive up the cost. So, yeah.
No, you see, for me, theft is theft, and I can't pass that. And I mean, the other day, to see the amount of money that the government, for example, of Jamaica, has been earmarking to just deal with that challenge alone, we're ridiculous. I mean, this any country, and I don't think, honestly, there's, in fact, I had an earlier conversation with Devon Gardner on this thing, and Devon indicated that, I said, there is no other country that is comparable to Jamaica in terms of the electricity theft. So, at least within the region.
I didn't know that. And within the region.
Yeah, within the region. So, with that is a real issue. But, Angela, as because we just have to look at the marketplace. And I'm continually concerned about the development of our markets within the region, our capital markets within the region, and whether or not they would be at a stage of highly liquid in some cases, but are they at the stage where they can accommodate entrepreneurs such as yourself at scale?
I think they are. I think if you would ask me this question, Joseph, 10 years ago, I'd say no, because when we were, I guess anecdotally, when we were starting to raise money for Paradise Park, just on the equity side, we were getting questions from bankers who will remain nameless, but they know there. Yeah, questions such as, does solar really work? How does it work? Is it, no, I mean, and that was 10 years, 10 years ago. And the questions were so fundamental around just the technology and also the structure. So the typical way of doing for utility scale is project finance, which means that you are not providing collateral. The only collateral you're really providing for the underlying financing is the plant and the contract, kind of in a more simplistic way. Those are two core things. So you're the contract with JPS in this case, and the actual solar asset. And there would be typical, bankers at the time saying, well, no, we're going to need balance sheet from a corporate. We're going to need collateral. We're going to need, kind of a personal guarantee. All of these, which is effectively a 19, and this is not meant to be derogatory, it's the same as that, but like a 19 style of corporate banking. Yeah. So that's partly why when we're raising money for the project, the vast majority of the funds came from overseas because they were more advanced. They were willing to take our own risk. Think about that. It was easier to raise money from foreigners to take local risk than it was to raise from local banks at the time. There was one, to be fair, there was one exception, which I will call out because that's a positive thing. So the CIBC, they were a bit more, they're a bit more advanced in terms of how they were thinking about it. But there were bankers who were basically saying they wanted to charge me. Basically they said, look, we are going to take a fee on what we invest, but we're also going to go to other people to raise money, and we need to charge a fee on the other people's money, etc., rather than being willing to take the risk on their own balance sheet because they weren't comfortable with it.
So they're basically looking at you and saying they're going to syndicate the financing.
Yes. Yes. Wow. When they had the money on their own balance sheets.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So,
All right. Let
but
me
that
ask
was
you this.
10 years ago. That was
No,
where it was
fine.
10 years ago.
Honestly, given that I did a commentary on asking the very simple question, are we really serious about doing business in the Caribbean? A couple of weeks ago, believe you me, it has not changed a whole lot. There may be some room for growth, yes, but I don't think it has changed that fundamentally.
Why?
But
Why?
on the other
On the other hand,
No, but I'm just thinking on the other side of it now, the straight capital market, the stock market, etc., from where you sit. I mean, at one point, Jamaica, and to a lesser extent, Trinidad, they had very fast growing and well performing, well structured stock markets, etc.
right.
Again, for example, in the case of Jamaica, no foreign exchange restrictions, so therefore the market is active and therefore and the stocks are liquid. In your from where you are, is our stock market at a level or at a stage rather where you would consider some kind of listing of any of your enterprises on it?
So you're talking about the Jamaican stock market.
Jamaican one, yes. Well, to be honest, Jamaica and Trinidad have the most developed.
So I think the answer would be yes, but in terms of being access to investments. So I think the Jamaican market has, especially when they had the junior stock exchange and they were doing quite a few tax breaks to encourage people to list. I think that those markets have done quite well for the country and added a bit of transparency and growth for smaller businesses. For me personally, in the stage where we are with the business, it's not a question of whether listing locally, it's a question of listing period. Because with listing, there's a different level of transparency, reporting that you have to do, and we may not want that in a small market where the competition is there and it's not, we may not want to disclose the level that we would need to be compliant with regulation. So it's less a question of whether I think the markets are functional or create an opportunity. Because they do, and I think that's clear. You can see a number of, I mean, Wigton is listed, right? The government privatized their renewables. MPC, which was one of the investors in Paradise Park, they're also listed. They're listed, I think, in Trinidad. I think they have a dual listing between Trinidad and Jamaica. Examples of listings. My reason for not doing it is a bit different to saying that is not a good market to list. But liquidity is a challenge, but it's the nature of it's a small market, right? It is a small market.
Yes. Put it this way, yes and no. Yes, it is a small market. Yes, sometimes liquidity can be an issue. But what I find is, and this is me, my perception. Guide me if you think I'm off base. But it seems that it's a mindset issue rather than dealing with it. When it comes on some things, we are ultra conservative in this region, and we take it to an extreme where to mask our conservative or ultra conservative nature, what we do is that we mire you in paperwork and excess bureaucracy, which ultimately it does not inure to the benefit of the region. It just does not.
I cannot disagree with you on that one. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, for instance, I've heard of the friend who was getting a mortgage and the mortgage provider requested life insurance. So I thought on the person, and I was asking around, and it's actually fairly common in the Caribbean market for the bank to request life insurance to cover the loan. So my question was, but surely the loan is covered by the house. That they would, if you died and your family were not able to meet the obligations under
Then you
the
have call.
you have call, you have collateral, you sell the house. If there's excess equity, you give it to the family and you claim your first lien on the house. So the idea that, man, so I was thinking, wow, this is a really lazy banker. So you're going to basically, the guy dies or the lady dies, and rather than dealing with trying to sell the house, you're just going to call on the proceeds of their life insurance.
And what it does is that it increases the effective transactions cost, because each of these things, they have an additive effect. It's to be honest with you, it is absolutely amazing sometimes, and all they can do is continue to advocate and hope that sense prevails.
But effectively, they're doubling up on their security. which is unfair in my view. I mean, the bankers on the listening to the podcast may have a different opinion, but I think it's unfair to the client because you're claiming dual security, double the value of what you're actually even lending.
Yeah, no, indeed, and it is not. I've seen ratios of 180, 200, 250% of the value of it. So, I mean, what you're saying is not that the data is not there, the literature is not there for people to reference. But it just strikes me that where we are at now, and we have to wrap up this in a few minutes, Angela. I'm just curious where we are now. If you had a crystal ball and from where you sit, you have invested in the region, you have also have access to resources globally, right? And a global market is your play field.
Yes.
What is it what are the probably, 2 or 3 things that the Caribbean needs to do to really put itself on a footing that it can truly attract investments at scale?
I think so. We do have good rule of law. I have to say that is one good base, but I think we need to maintain it. But from a regulation is deregulation was the only reason why the first project I did even exists. Period.
Okay.
So up until that point, independent developers could not develop renewable energy projects unless you partnered with the government. Period. And the minute they unlocked that, it was our project, WRB's project, BMR's project, all the market just started to flourish. You remove the noose from the market, it starts to flourish. Let the market work. And then the other thing I would say would be, at least on the financing side, we've talked a lot about the requirements, just going back to even the mortgage point. I think we have to be comfortable that if you're going to make a return, there's risk. And we're not saying go wild with the risk, but be fair with the risk. And that I don't think is fully reflected currently in the market. I haven't given you 3 things, Joseph, but maybe the 2 can.
No, that's fine. That's fine because they say why I raise the question in it is that, frankly speaking, like a business, if you don't grow, you'll stagnate and die.
Yes.
And frankly, what I find is that, and I keep using this phrase on this program, which it bothers me to have to even say it, but we are so mired in administrative inertia that we're killing.
No, we're killing it. So the third one is actually so again, I won't even call the country, you can probably guess, but it's in the Caribbean. So we were permitting for projects, and the parish council, municipal corporation, whatever you want to call it. I checked with my development manager, say, hey, it's been a few months now. What's the status of the application? Haven't heard from them. So he went to check, and the person said, oh, we don't have any record of your application. He whipped out the payment receipts. We don't pay cash to anyone, right? So everything is bank transfer, wire transfer. There's a paper trail. And they went, oh, okay. And then a few hours later, we still can't find it. So I needed to call a government trade and investment body to have someone call the senior person at that parish council to say, where is it? And within a couple hours, it miraculously
was found. Yeah. Wonderful.
But it's a problem because we're fortunate where I can put in that phone call. But what happens to all the other people who cannot access that point, who do not have someone to call? It's not good. So that's the third thing. There you get your 3 points. That's the third thing.
I mean, no, indeed, but it's just really sad because sometimes you have to wonder, is it truly incompetence, or are there other motives at play? Because
incentive mechanism needs to be put in place to encourage prompt, accurate processing.
Well, Angela, I mean, I have to leave you now, but incentive mechanisms, is that really it? Because truthfully, listen, in terms of permitting, there are actual electronic solutions to this thing. One of them, which I'm familiar with, known as the Amanda system, right? What it is, a platform, submitting, for example, building plans, and you submit how many thing electronically. It is routinely and automatically shipped off to the various agencies. People have the time to opine on it, blah, 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 blah. Within probably 30, 45 days, you should be able to get your decision one way or the other on your project. rather than trying to do it sequentially, where send it to one, and then when they are finished, they send it to our next one, which can run you into months, if not years. So the point I'm making is it really that they need incentives to deal with it, or we just need to enforce these kinds of solutions? Because honestly, they're hindering development.
I think that's fair. I mean, I didn't think of it that way, but I think you're right. I think having proper systems, because again, I did a talk at a conference in the Netherlands, and it was about development and how you develop in the region. And there was a photograph that one of my guys took of a permitting office. There was a stack of paper that high. And you can imagine all these Europeans looking at it going, paper? All of that paper!
Yeah.
And it was totally disorganized. So no, technology, that's an excellent point. I think that would be very good to help.
Well, Angela, the struggle continues. All I can say is
That's fine.
congratulations. Congratulations on what you have done so far. Congratulations, not just in terms of transitioning, and I call it applied business that you are doing, because you're moving from the straight, I would call it, the academic base is strong, yes, and the advisory background is equally strong. But at the same time, you have put it into the real world, and you are raising your money. You are doing well from all accounts. I mean, I'm sure that some nights you probably don't sleep as well as you should, but ultimately you do. The struggle is real, so ultimately you continue. So Angela Rainford, founder of Soleco Energies.
Yes.
And the other one that I cannot pronounce.
Rainmaker, but that's fine.
Rainmaker, I do not know. You are something else. You turn it around. How long did it take you to learn to pronounce that thing?
A long time. I still get it wrong sometimes.
Because Rainmaker, to turn it the next way, boy, that's amazing. Angela, thank you so much for your time. And we do hope that we'll be able to call on you from time to time to give us further insights into what's going on in our markets.
Happy to help. Happy to support.
All right. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Sure.